Welcome to the Economist Word Spotlight. When a nation races at breakneck speed toward a high-tech future, what happens to the millions of people who get left behind in the dust?
That's the big question, right? It's something we really need to figure out.
Yeah, it's an incredibly urgent question. And, to truly understand the human and economic stakes involved here, we kind of have to look past the surface-level statistics. We have to immerse ourselves in the physical reality of the places caught in the middle of this huge transition.
Exactly. You can't just look at a spreadsheet for this.
Right. So the article guiding our conversation today is titled, China's High-Tech Rise is Leaving Much of the Country Behind. And our specific mission today is to explore this sweeping story of inequality and historical shifts and the human cost of automation.
Yeah, and we're going to do that by unpacking 10 very specific, highly evocative vocabulary words from the article. These aren't just, dictionary definitions. They're like windows into this much larger narrative.
Right. They show us what actually happens when a country tries to force a massive technological leap without bringing its most vulnerable citizens along for the ride.
Exactly. So to start, I want you, the listener, to mentally place yourself in Tianshui.
Tianshui, right. It's a city in the western province of Gansu.
Yeah. And if you were to just walk down its streets today, the visual contradictions would be jarring, just immediately jarring.
Oh, totally. You'd be walking past these vast, silent stretches of disused factories, just, dusty, decaying structures with broken windows.
Yeah, looking like ghosts of an industrial era that is just completely over.
Right. But then you turn a corner and it's like the landscape just fractures.
Yeah.
Right next to that decay, you see these shiny, pristine new industrial parks.
It's wild. There's literally a futuristic glass and steel exhibition hall called Tianshui Industry 2050.
Yeah, and inside they're displaying all these advanced, zippy, high-tech products, like robotics and sensors.
Right, the exact things the local government is desperately hoping will be the lifeblood of the city for the next few decades.
Which brings us to the mindset of the policymakers in Beijing who are orchestrating this whole thing. They have a very deliberate top-down strategy to basically overwrite the decay with new tech infrastructure.
Yeah, they want to pave over the past, essentially.
Exactly. And that ambition introduces our first vocabulary word, which is Rust Belt. The original sentence from the article is, they want China's Rust Belt to reinvent itself with technology.
So when we hear Rust Belt in English, a lot of people immediately think of the American Midwest.
Right, like Detroit or Cleveland.
Exactly. But here, the reporting is applying it to the Chinese industrial geography. It describes a region that used to be the beating heart of the country's heavy manufacturing.
Places defined by steel mills, massive state-run factories, coal mines.
Right. But it's a region that has since fallen into severe systemic economic decline. The factories close down, the machinery literally gathers rust, and the population just drains away.
And its opposite would be a Sunbelt, right, where things are booming and growing.
Yeah, exactly. In China, Rust Belt usually refers to the northeastern provinces, like historical Manchuria. But now it's increasingly applying to inland industrial hubs like Tianshui, places that have basically lost their reason to exist, economically speaking.
It's such a specific linguistic choice, too. Calling it a Rust Belt implies a structural decline, not just a cyclical one.
Yeah, right. A cyclical decline is just a recession. You wait it out, and the factories eventually spin back up.
Right. But a Rust Belt means the foundation itself is obsolete. The global supply chains have moved on without you.
Exactly. So when the central planners demand that this Rust Belt reinvent itself with technology, they are proposing something completely artificial. It's like a massive organ transplant.
That's a great way to put it. It feels like trying to put a smartwatch on an antique grandfather clock. Like the hardware is fundamentally incompatible.
Right. They're trying to graft this 21st century, highly automated digital economy onto a 20th century manual labor chassis.
And they assumed that just pouring money in, building things like Tianshui Industry 2050 will somehow override the structural decay. But why doesn't dropping tech into a declining area automatically fix it?
Well, it's because economies behave way more like biological ecosystems than computer hardware.
Yeah, you can't just install a new operating system on a decaying hard drive.
Think about it like an agricultural monoculture. Imagine a massive farming region that has spent 50 years growing absolutely nothing but one specific strain of corn.
Right. The soils are depleted. The infrastructure only handles corn.
Exactly. And the farmers only know corn. So when the market for that corn collapses, The government can't just parachute in and say, okay, starting tomorrow, you are all a cutting-edge vertical farming hub for exotic orchids.
Right, because the physical infrastructure is wrong, but more importantly, the knowledge ecosystem is just totally missing.
Exactly. You drop a multi-million-dollar tech factory into a dying town, and it doesn't heal the town. The town doesn't have the supplementary businesses, the legal services, or the labor pool to support it. So the factory just sits there, isolated.
And that isolation leads to a massive macroeconomic freeze, which brings us perfectly to our second vocabulary word, stagnant.
Let's hear the sentence for that one.
Here it is. Calling for the transformation of stagnant cities into innovative places that can offer their inhabitants a high-quality life.
So stagnant, in its most literal sense, is like a body of water that has stopped flowing. It becomes murky, it becomes lifeless.
Right, not moving, not growing.
Yeah. And in a macroeconomic context, calling a city stagnant means its economic velocity is just zero. Capital isn't circulating, new businesses aren't forming, upward mobility is completely paralyzed.
It's basically stalled economic progress, especially when you compare these hinterland cities to the booming coastal regions.
Exactly. And the planners are writing these policy documents demanding that this murky, lifeless pool just instantly transform into a rushing river of innovation.
Which is such a wild contrast. It really exposes the limits of state power. You can mandate the construction of a building, but you can't legislate innovation into existence.
No, you really can't. Innovation needs friction. It needs a high density of educated people bouncing ideas off each other, failing, trying again.
And venture capital willing to take actual risks. A stagnant environment repels all of that by definition.
Right. And while the officials talk about offering a high-quality life, the actual GDP numbers in Tianshui tell a very different story.
Yeah, it's not just growing slower than Beijing or Shanghai. It is actively contracting.
The population shrinkage alone is wild.
Yeah, the population has shrunk by nearly 500,000 people over the past decade. It's down to 2.9 million.
When 500,000 people pack up and leave a municipality, that's not just a statistical blip.
No, that's a mass exodus. It's a localized depression.
And a population drain of that size fundamentally changes the math for any kind of recovery. The young and ambitious people leave for the coast, and they leave behind an aging population.
Right, a population that needs more social services, but generates way less tax revenue. So the local government's tax base shrinks right when they need the money the most.
Exactly. So building these high-tech industrial parks is basically a desperate attempt to plug a hole in a sinking ship. They hope the new facilities will counterbalance the catastrophic losses from the old industries.
Which perfectly tees up our third vocabulary word, offset.
Let's look at the original sentence from the text.
Okay, here it is. The new factories have failed to offset a broader slowdown in the city's economy.
So to offset something means to counterbalance it or compensate for it, especially a negative effect.
Right, so if you lose 10,000 jobs in traditional manufacturing, you hope the new tech sector creates 10,000 jobs to offset that loss.
Yeah, to keep things stable. But the reporting is explicitly saying this is not happening. The minimal gains from these new tech factories cannot make up for the massive decay around them.
The statistics on this are just staggering. 10 years ago, Tianshui's GDP per person was 16% of Beijing's. Now, despite all these new tech parks, it's only 14%.
The gap is widening.
Well, it's growing slower than the national average. But wait, I have to push back here. Aren't new factories supposed to bring a boom? Like, during the Industrial Revolution, a new factory meant a massive influx of jobs, right?
Normally, yes. In the 1990s in southern China, a new factory meant thousands of jobs, which spurred local housing, retail, restaurants, everything.
Right, a chain reaction. So why is that broken in Tianshui?
It's broken because the fundamental nature of manufacturing has shifted. And this is something that terrifies labor economists.
Oh, wow. Why?
Because the factories being built in Tianshui today are not the labor-intensive sweatshops of the 20th century. They are highly automated. They produce advanced components like sensors.
Right, so instead of needing thousands of human hands on an assembly line.
Exactly. An advanced robotics factory requires a massive upfront investment in machinery, but it might only need a few dozen highly specialized technicians to keep the robots running.
Oh, I see. The capital-to-labor ratio is inverted.
Exactly. You spend billions on the facility, but you hardly hire anyone from the local population. It's jobless investment.
Jobless investment. Wow. So the state pours money into the city, but the money totally bypasses the actual citizens.
Right. You cannot offset the loss of 10,000 working-class jobs with 50 high-level engineering positions. The math just doesn't work.
And the laid-off workers from the old ball-bearing plant definitely don't have the skills to program a CNC machine in the new sensor plant.
No, they're stranded. It's a massive blind spot in this top-down planning. They're upgrading the hardware of the economy without upgrading the human capital, the software.
And that distinction between hardware and human capital is really the core of this whole crisis. The government wants to dominate global tech, right? AI, quantum computing.
Yes, but the talent pool for that isn't evenly distributed. It's heavily concentrated.
Which leaves huge swaths of the population completely unequipped to participate. And that brings us to our fourth vocabulary word, brainy.
Let's read the sentence for context.
But while the high-tech drive has helped some brainy, connected, and wealthy cities become even richer, most of those in the hinterland lack the supply chains or talent to take advantage of it.
So in everyday conversation, brainy just means very intelligent or clever.
Right.
But here, the journalists are using it to describe a specific macroeconomic phenomenon, human capital agglomeration.
Basically, cities with a dense concentration of highly educated talent.
Exactly. A brainy city has spent decades building top-tier universities, research institutes, and a culture that draws elite graduates from all over the country.
Places like Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen.
Yeah, they act like massive gravitational black holes for talent. If you're a brilliant software engineer born in a rural province, you don't stay there. You get pulled into the orbit of a brainy city.
Because that's where the capital and the peers are.
Right. And the sheer scale of the educational deficit in the rest of the country makes creating new brainy cities almost impossible.
Yeah, the expert analysis here highlights a really critical stat for you to understand. Roughly 60% of China's total workforce lacks a high school education.
It's a number that should just stop any economic planner in their tracks. We're talking about roughly 500 million people.
500 million. That's bigger than the entire population of the U.S.
Yes. All trying to navigate a 21st century economy without a basic high school diploma. You cannot build a brainy tech hub without a brainy workforce.
You can't staff an advanced semiconductor plant with workers who never got to learn basic algebra.
Exactly. And the structural barriers that created this gap are so deep, it's not an accident that talent is hoarded on the coast.
It's tied to the hukou system, right? The internal household registration mechanism.
Yeah, the hukou system is crucial to understanding this. For decades, it tied a citizen's social benefits, like public education and healthcare, to their birthplace.
So if you were born in a rural village, your hukou was rural.
Right, and if you moved to a wealthy coastal city to work in a factory, you were essentially an undocumented immigrant in your own country. You could build the city, but your kids couldn't go to the public schools there.
Wow. So generation after generation of rural workers were systematically denied the educational resources they needed to become brainy.
Exactly. Coastal cities extracted cheap labor without investing in the intellectual development of those laborers.
Which is vital context for why Tianshui is struggling so much today. To understand the psychology of the workers left behind, we have to look at what they were originally trained to do.
Right. What role did this city play before the high-tech mandate?
And that leads to a beautifully evocative metaphor in the reporting, our fifth vocabulary word, cog.
Let's hear the sentence.
It became an important cog in the state-planned economy. Its factories made tractors, ball bearings, and matches.
So literally, a cog is a small tooth on a gear. It has a single repetitive purpose. It meshes with the next gear to turn a larger machine.
Metaphorically, it means a small but essential part of a larger system.
Exactly. Here, it captures Tianshui's historical role beautifully. In a capitalist economy, you want innovators, disruptors. But in China's state-planned command economy of the 1960s, independent thought was a threat.
They just needed functional, obedient, replaceable parts.
Right. The central government in Beijing would draft a 5-year plan, look at a map, and arbitrarily decide Tianshui would be a manufacturing base.
Just hand down quotas, like you'll make 10 million matches this year.
Exactly. The factory manager didn't worry about supply chains, consumer demand, or profit margins. The state provided the raw materials and bought the final output.
The workers were literally trained to be cogs, just performing a specific, repetitive manual task for decades, totally insulated from market competition.
Which makes the historical whiplash of this city so incredible.
It really is. I mean, think about Tianshui's history. It's an ancient cultural hub. It has the Meijishan grottos, these stunning Buddhist shrines carved into a cliff face.
Right, there's deep history there.
Legend even says it's the birthplace of China's first emperor, a serpent-bodied demigod. And it goes from that mythological origin to a factory town making matches, and now it's trying to be a robotics hub.
The psychological whiplash is just staggering. You're asking a population trained for obedience to suddenly act like Silicon Valley venture capitalists.
Which is impossible. And that transition wasn't exactly gentle either, which brings us to our sixth word, bumpy transition.
Let's read the original sentence.
But most local factories were not competitive enough to survive China's bumpy transition to a more market-driven economy in the 1980s and 1990s.
So a transition is a period of change. Calling it bumpy means it was full of difficulties, obstacles, or instability.
Yeah, and frankly, bumpy feels like a polite understatement by the reporters here.
It really does. It was fraught with massive friction and systemic shocks.
We really need to unpack what happened in the 90s to grasp the trauma here. The government realized these massive state-owned enterprises, the COGs, were incredibly inefficient.
Yeah, they were hemorrhaging money, making things no one wanted to buy, and relying on endless bailouts.
So they implemented a policy basically called grasp the large, let go of the small.
Right. They kept control of vital industries like energy, but cut the cord on thousands of smaller regional factories.
They forced them to sink or swim in the newly unleashed free market. And for places like Tianshui, it was a catastrophic sinking.
Totally. Factory managers who had never thought about customer acquisition were suddenly competing with hyper-efficient private coastal firms and global imports.
Predictably, they were slaughtered. Thousands went bankrupt. And the human cost. I mean, millions of workers who played by the rules and their whole lives were suddenly laid off.
The safety net vanished overnight, the machinery broke, and the cogs were just discarded. This bumpy transition is the root cause of the Rust Belt status we talked about earlier.
Right. And that discardment fundamentally altered the psychology of the working class. Which brings us to a deeply resonant cultural concept, our seventh vocabulary word, iron rice bowl.
Oh, this is such an important term. Let's hear the sentence.
One of the workers was Mrs. Dong, now in her 80s, who enjoyed an ultra-stable iron rice bowl job at a printing press.
The Chinese term is Tai Fan Wan. It's absolutely iconic for understanding 20th century China's social contract.
Right, because a regular porcelain rice bowl is fragile. If you drop it, it shatters.
Exactly. But an iron rice bowl is indestructible. Economically, it means a job with guaranteed security and benefits heavily associated with the planned economy. It implies a livelihood that cannot be taken away.
It wasn't just a job, it was a whole ecosystem, right?
Yes, the danwei, or work unit. If you worked at the printing press, your danwei provided your housing, the clinic for your medical care, the school for your kids. It provided your pension.
So you accepted low wages and no freedom of career choice. But in exchange, the state eliminated economic anxiety.
Yeah.
You knew you would never starve.
Right, and Miss Dawn's story perfectly illustrates how powerful the system was.
Yeah. The article mentions she retired in her 40s with a pension, but the craziest detail to me, the thing that makes it so alien to a modern listener, is that she had a guarantee her son could inherit her job.
Inherited jobs, it's just a totally different world.
I really want you, the listener, to contrast that absolute generational security with the anxiety of the modern gig economy. Today, you might drive for an app. Your income is determined by some opaque algorithm.
And if the algorithm changes, you lose everything. No healthcare, no pension, and definitely no passing the gig down to your kids.
Exactly. You are at the mercy of chaotic market forces. What happens to a society's psyche when that iron rice bowl is just shattered?
Well, the floor falls out. When the government forced that bumpy transition in the 90s, they smashed the iron rice bowl. Older folks like Mrs. Dong scraped by on pensions, but the younger generation was thrust into a hyper-competitive capitalism without the education or support to succeed.
And that deep anxiety still permeates these cities today, especially because while the old security vanished, a new, totally alien economy quickly took its place.
Which brings us to our eighth word, sprung up.
Let's hear it. In the past 10 years, a new generation of high-tech factories making gizmos such as sensors and machine tools has sprung up.
So, to spring up means to appear or develop suddenly and quickly. It evokes the image of mushrooms bursting through the soil overnight.
Right, rapid, almost weed-like growth, not a slow organic development.
Yeah. In Tianshui, this refers to the state-subsidized construction of these new tech parks. The government cleared the land, allocated capital, and these facilities seemingly appeared out of nowhere.
But there's a subtle connotation of artificiality there, right?
Absolutely. Organic growth happens in tandem with available nutrients and sunlight. These factories were willed into existence by government fiat, not by actual local capability or market demand.
And that leads to the tragic irony here. The physical infrastructure of the future has sprung up right in their backyards, but the local people are completely excluded from it.
Yeah, you mentioned the museum exhibit earlier, the
Yeah.
one showing the factory floors.
Oh, yeah. The museum shows photos of the factory floors over the decades. In the 1970s, the floors are packed shoulder to shoulder with human workers, the cogs. But as you look at newer photos, the humans disappear.
Replaced by robotic arms.
Exactly. The factories that have sprung up hardly have any people, and the few locals who do work there are doing menial tasks for dismal pay.
The pay is awful. The article says it's around 3,000 yuan a month.
Which is like $440.
Yeah.
That is half of what someone might make in Shanghai.
Barely enough to cover basic living expenses, let alone buy a house. So the local youth look at these factories that have sprung up, see the terrible wages, and they make the only rational choice. They leave.
Yeah, the article introduces us to Wen Jin, a 27-year-old local. He says, "I'd like to stay here to settle down, but there's just no good jobs for young people." He had to migrate east to Jiangsu province just to find work.
Right. The city's being hollowed out from the inside. The jobs that have sprung up aren't for them.
Which moves us from the lack of local opportunity to the broader structural barriers that keep places like Tianshui at the bottom. This vicious cycle of decline.
And that perfectly sets up our 9th vocabulary word. Stellar. Let's read the sentence.
But few parts of inland China have a chance of attracting such stellar jobs, explains Dan Wang of Eurasia Group, a consultancy.
So stellar literally pertains to the stars.
Right.
But metaphorically, applied to the labor market, it means outstanding, excellent, or exceptionally good.
Right. Highly lucrative, top-tier R&D positions in the tech sector.
Yes. A stellar job is the prize of the modern economy. It's intellectually stimulating. It pays incredibly well. The opposite of a precarious gig.
And the analysts are saying inland cities have zero chance of attracting these stellar jobs.
Zero. And we have to look at the economic theory of clustering to understand why. Tech companies don't put their highly paid R&D teams in declining Rust Belt cities, no matter how big the tax break is.
They put them in the brainy cities.
Exactly. Because stellar jobs require a stellar ecosystem. A top AI researcher wants to live where they can jump to a rival firm, attend premier conferences, get venture capital.
And send their kids to elite schools.
Yes. So coastal cities hoard the human capital, which attracts the stellar jobs, which attracts more human capital.
It's a winner-takes-all scenario. A virtuous cycle for the coast and a vicious cycle for the hinterlands. And the financial disparity is just wild. Tech salaries in coastal hubs can top 1 million yuan a year.
Compare that to the 36,000 yuan a year on the factory floor in Tianshui.
It's two entirely different economic universes in the same country. The stellar jobs are walled off from the hinterlands.
And while they can't attract the economy of the future, they're simultaneously being crushed by the collapse of the economy of the present.
Which brings us to our final and maybe most devastating vocabulary word, drag on. Let's look at the original sentence.
Yep.
This, in turn, has been a drag on consumption because people feel poorer.
So to be a drag on something means to slow it down, hinder its progress, or act as a heavy burden.
Like an airplane trying to take off with the landing gear still down. The drag prevents it from gaining altitude.
Exactly. Here, the journalists are pointing to a massive systemic weight pulling down the entire local economy, making a high-tech liftoff impossible.
And that massive drag is the collapse of the Chinese property market.
Which is huge. For 20 years, real estate was the engine of wealth creation in China. Buying an apartment was the main way regular people built equity.
But that bubble has burst, and the physical evidence is everywhere in Tianshui. The reporters describe walking the outskirts and seeing unfinished concrete flats littering the landscape, abandoned by bankrupt developers.
Yeah, local property investment in Tianshui dropped by 40% last year. 40%.
When the primary vehicle for your life savings drops by 40%, it changes your psychology completely. As the quote says, people feel poorer.
And when people feel poorer, they stop spending. They don't buy clothes, they don't eat out.
Which creates a deflationary spiral. The malls are gloomy, shops are shuttered. The collapse of the property market is actively pulling down the spending power of the citizens. It acts as a drag on consumption.
Right, which starves local businesses, leads to more layoffs, and depresses consumption even more. But the drag goes even deeper. It strikes at the local government's ability to even function.
Yes, we really need to explain the mechanics of municipal finance here. It's so critical. Unlike in many Western cities, Chinese municipalities generally don't collect property taxes from homeowners to fund their budgets.
Right. They rely almost entirely on leasing land to property developers.
Right. They clear land, sell the development rights to a massive real estate company, and use that huge influx of cash to fund everything: roads, hospitals, parks, and most importantly, the public school system.
Land sales were the lifeblood of the local state. But when the property market crashes and developers go bankrupt...
They stop buying land, and the local government's revenue just dries up instantly.
Exactly. They're left with massive debts from building those shiny tech parks, but no income to fund basic services. And the most tragic casualty of that budgetary collapse is education.
This is where the trap just snaps shut. The local government is broke, so they can't invest in schools. Tianshui spends less than 1/3 of the amount per pupil that Beijing spends.
Less than a third.
Yeah. So, I mean, if a city's budget is shrinking, how can it ever afford to educate its kids to compete for those stellar jobs? It can't. A kid in Tianshui gets a fraction of the resources of a kid on the coast.
The outcome is predetermined. They are profoundly disadvantaged before they even take the National College Entrance Exam, the Gaokao.
Which means they won't get into elite universities, so they'll never get the credentials for the stellar jobs.
Right. The drag of the property market collapse entrenches the educational inequality. The lack of education ensures the workforce can't do high-tech jobs. The lack of high-tech jobs ensures the city remains stagnant.
It's a perfectly sealed, vicious cycle. The journalists quote a mother in the article, Shi Qingting. She has a 12-year-old daughter. She looks around at the broken schools and dying factories, and she says, it's too difficult for children to compete here. They end up trapped.
Trapped. It's just a devastating word to end on.
It really is. We've covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's just briefly recap the journey of these vocabulary words because it really crystallizes the story of Tianshui.
Let's do it.
We started with a stagnant rust belt that is desperately trying to offset its economic decline.
Right, and we looked back at its history as a rigid cog in a state machine where workers had the absolute security of the iron rice bowl.
Before everything was shattered by a bumpy transition to a market economy. And now we see how these new automated factories have sprung up locally, but they keep the stellar jobs walled off in the coastal cities.
Leaving a brainy elite to thrive elsewhere, while a localized housing crisis acts as a massive drag on everyone left behind in the hinterlands.
It's a profound, really unsettling narrative.
It is, but, the central government isn't totally blind to this. They recently released a plan to invest in people by 2030, aiming to fix this very inequality by allocating more funds to education for poorer families.
Right.
But I want to address you, the listener, with a final thought to ponder here. Consider that 12-year-old girl we just mentioned, trapped in a fiercely unlevel playing field. When the foundational architecture of an economy requires cheap labor to build its high-tech future, can any amount of government policy truly rewrite the destiny of the people left behind in the Rust Belt?
Wow.
Or is the gap between the haves and have-nots simply the unavoidable cost of a nation's rapid evolution?
That is a heavy, complex question with no easy answers. Thank you so much for joining us to unpack these complex ideas and the powerful language used to document them. Keep exploring the forces shaping our world, and keep questioning the words behind the headlines. We'll catch you next time.